all give me a big pat on the back for having finished today's book, Keeping the Moon by Sarah Dessen, yesterday, and doing the review today. That is huge news. There's no 2-week waiting period during which I've forgotten the plot and all the characters. Hopefully I still remember the plot and all the characters, but good night. My brain is no longer a sponge. If you have kept up with my channel, you know that I did review Along for the Ride some time ago. So if you are unfamiliar with Dessen, that's a good place to start. I will say, I don't remember liking this book so much when I first read it. It's been like 15-ish years since I've read it. This is not one that I have read over and over. I just haven't read Sarah Dessen over and over and over. There are a couple books that I've probably read 3 or 4 times. This is not one of them. It surprises me because this book was really good. It, in many ways, was very simple and almost juvenile. All of her novels are YA, but despite being really simple, this book had a lot to say about growing up and accepting yourself that resonated heavily with me. I do enjoy the way that Dessen always has a lot of quirk. There were moments that I felt like her characters were a little too quirky, but on the whole, I like that her characters don't feel quirky just to be quirky. They are quirky. She makes you believe these are character traits. If you watched my review of If He Had Been With Me, that was a terrible example of an author trying to make her main character quirky, and it did not ring true. Whereas in this book, characters were weird, characters were flawed, but it felt natural. Let's just hop into it. The main character is this girl named Nicole Sparks. Everybody calls her Colie, and her mother is fitness guru Kiki Sparks. They had been overweight their entire lives, had lived hand to mouth. They would pick up and move at the drop of a hat, and then one day her mother rear-ended somebody. They had no money to pay for it, so her mother, who's very good with people, convinced this woman who owns a gym to let her pay off her debt by working at this gym. Eventually, Kiki is brought on full time. She starts attending / teaching fitness classes, and she becomes so popular and she loses so much weight that she becomes Kiki Sparks. During this summer, she has decided to go on her world tour, and she decides to leave Colie, who has also lost weight, with her estranged sister, Mira. Mira is the one character I thought could use a little bit more because Dessen's characters are always more than meets the eye. Colie hasn't had much to do with her aunt her entire life. According to Colie, her mother, who had not graduated college, who had gotten pregnant and dropped out, was essentially the black sheep. She was an embarrassment to her parents. Thus, her parents left everything to Mira. I guess Kiki saw Mira as the golden child. They didn't get along in certain respects, and so they just didn't have much to do with each other. According to Mira, it's not that she refuted those claims, and this is only touched upon lightly, and I thought we could have used more of it, but it was more like Kiki would not accept help, and that even though Mira, who is also overweight, sorry, my hair, oh my gosh, I don't even know what I'm doing. Mira, who is also overweight, and despite the fact that Kiki sends her all of her videotapes and all the equipment, Mira is happy with her weight. She is happy with her life, but she will watch Kiki on television. She will just watch these tapes just to see how inspirational her sister is. And I thought it was weird because Mira, at some point, Colie brings up how everybody makes fun of Mira, and she relates to this because this is how she'd always been treated. This is kind of a spoiler. Mira denies it having an effect on her. I didn't understand this concept of estrangement, yet it's almost like she's pining for her sister. And it's not that she has to do the sister's workout tapes. It's not that she has to lose the weight, but she doesn't seem to put much of an effort into having a relationship with Kiki or Colie. And on that note, why would Kiki send her daughter to live with her estranged sister for an entire summer? Except for the fact that's the only family that Colie has. I didn't understand this dynamic at all. This is where we pick up with Colie getting on the train, which let me just sidetrack here. I loved how period this was. The book was published in 1999. It takes place in the late 90s, and it took me aback because I didn't realize that certain technologies were not prevalent at this time. Like, they're still watching videotapes. I thought DVDs had become a bit more popular, but then again, I went to school in the early 2000s. I went to college in the early 2000s, and I think I had 5 DVDs, and holy cow, were they expensive. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that they were listening to cassette tapes, that they were watching videotapes, and that things in a way were kind of Stone Age. But I really enjoyed this setting of we are in a time and a place, and it truly feels like we are in a time and a place, and that's just how it is. Granted, that is the time in which she was writing, so it's not like she had future knowledge and she's pretending to be in the 90s. But it was a nostalgia factor for me, and so if that is something that touches you, you should read it for that alone. It was just a simpler time, and I just enjoyed the little touches. But as I mentioned, Dessen is really good with setting. She's excellent at putting you in a time and place and making a place come to life. Her setting is a character in and of itself. We don't really know what's going on with Colie except that she was overweight. She is something of an outcast, and she's not necessarily looking forward to going to, I was gonna call it Cousins Beach, but this is not the summer I turned pretty, to Colby. She shows up, she's got a truckload of stuff, and the dude that picks her up is this guy named Norman. He is about her age. He is taken aback at some of the equipment that she has brought along. And at this point, because I've literally forgotten the entire plot, like I have no idea what's gonna happen. I'm wondering if this is the summer that Colie is going to say, you know what, I might not want to be that heavy again, but maybe I also don't want to follow my mother's weight loss plan to the T. She's just gonna throw all of this stuff to the wind, and she's gonna throw her diet to the wind, and she's gonna find that happy medium. That's not what happens, but she does have all this equipment that she's embarrassed about, and as far as I can tell, she never uses. She's pretty judgmental. As much as she has been judged and made fun of, she is rather cynical, and Norman is kind of her opposite. He's very artsy, he listens to folky music, he has broken mannequins in his backseat, and he's trying to connect with her, but she's very standoffish, and I guess rightfully so, given her past. They pull up to Mira's, and it turns out that Norman lives downstairs. These two other girls in their early 20s, Morgan and Isabel, live in the tiny house like down the path. I literally spent 85% of this novel trying to keep straight who is Morgan and who is Isabel. Not that it was hard, but listening to it, I found it difficult to remember whose characteristics were whose. I think if one had been brunette and one had been blonde, or if there's just been more physical distinguishing characteristics, then it would have been easier for me. I just could not keep it straight. But we meet Mira. She's something of a recluse. She is not accepted by the majority of the townspeople, and she loves wrestling. She also has made her money in greeting cards. She went to art school and at some point found fame and fortune with this certain character that she created and designed greeting cards around. There was a moment when Colie learns that Mira was the artist behind this greeting card character, which I guess spawned dolls and all kinds of other paraphernalia. I was expecting Colie, because Colie didn't know, and so I was expecting her to be like, well, no wonder my mom wouldn't get me that doll, because it was created by her sister and she's not on good terms with her sister, and that we would have expanded this relationship some more. We don't get that. We just get a lot of Mira doesn't seem to care that people make fun of her. She doesn't seem to care that she stands out. She doesn't seem to care that she has a less than stellar reputation around town. Although she is really good about talking about this one woman and her big-headed baby, which I was waiting and waiting and waiting for this to come to some kind of fruition, and it doesn't. All we get is Colie has had enough of listening to this woman besmirch her aunt. She's gonna say something, she gets interrupted, and then she brings all of this up to Mira later, and Mira's like, I could care less. Okay. On one hand, it was very subtle. All of the themes were extremely subtle. Well, not extremely, but a lot of them were very subtle, and they weren't handled the way that I'm used to situations being handled. Like, there's no knockdown, drag out, there's no light bulb moment, there's not really a lot of drama. It's more that Colie comes to the realization that these people aren't worth her time, and that's how it is, and she should take after her aunt a little more. But at the same time, we're not bashing her mother because she's so different than Mira. They're both strong women, and these are characteristics that Colie should try to emulate. So it was interesting how Dessen handled the material, but at the same time, it was refreshing. What happens? I know. The night that Colie arrives, her aunt is like, oh man, I could really go for a grilled chicken salad. And Colie's like, okay. Turns out it's not a very healthy chicken salad, but this sends Colie to the Last Chance Bar and Grill, which is also a restaurant that we will see throughout Sarah's world. Colie gets there, and this is where she officially meets Isabel and Morgan. We also learn that Norman is the cook there. This is another moment where I'm like, is she gonna break her diet? Because she ends up getting, I think, the onion rings, which are what this place is known for, and you'll see it over and over and over throughout Dessen's books. She's like, you know what? I think I'm gonna get a hamburger and fries, or a hamburger and onion rings. Why should I abide by my diet? It smells so good. She grabs the things, and when she first gets there, and this is really just where things started going downhill for me with keeping Morgan and Isabel straight. Morgan is kind of tall and lanky and gawky, and she's not particularly attractive in the traditional sense, but girl's got a fiery personality, and we first see her throwing a fit over getting a bad tip. She throws down her apron, she's like, I quit, stomps out to the parking lot to give this patron a piece of her mind, only to come back in and be like, I missed him. And then we see that this is also a theme. This is something that she often does, and you get in the sense that it's all for show. How can she miss every single one of these people? It's probably just more like, I'm taking a stance and didn't really want to follow through with it, but I'm making a stance. At the same time, Isabel is just like, okay, whatever, not reacting to it whatsoever. But Isabel is blonde, and she's the epitome of everything Colie thinks she should be, and everything that those girls are who make her life miserable. She makes a comment about Colie's really terrible home dye job, and then her nose ring, and they're relatively harmless, but Colie doesn't react well because she's been made fun of her entire life. So she retreats into herself, books it back to Mira's, and never eats her hamburger. Isabel and Morgan do show up sometime later, and Morgan apologizes. No, not Morgan. Isabel apologizes. Sorry, I will continue to get them wrong. Isabel apologizes at Morgan's prompting. It doesn't make a difference to Colie. At some other point, Colie and Norman are on their way, I think, to the library, only to see some tour buses stopped outside Last Chance. And he's like, oh gosh, I guess they're understaffed. And this just blows my mind. Maybe it's a 90s thing, maybe small businesses work differently, but apparently the owner of the Last Chance is off traveling the world for 3 months or something. There is another cook who is quite a bit older, but he plays absolutely no part in the entire novel. Essentially, this guy left his business in the hands of two 21-year-olds and, I don't know, a 19-year-old. And now Colie comes in, two 20-year-olds, a 17-year-old, and a 15-year-old. It's mind-blowing. Anyways, this is all the staff they have. Apparently there's somebody else, but she's off for the summer as well or something. Colie and Norman pitch in. Colie is kind of all of her worst fears rolled into one, but she faces them. She is then brought on as a waitress. And of course her mom is like, why are you doing this? You don't need to do this. And Colie's like, I actually kind of like it. So through this process, we see her growing as a person and becoming stronger and learning how to come into herself and accept herself. We learn that Morgan is engaged. Is this young stud baseball player who apparently is the first person to have ever called her beautiful. He gives her a diamond chip. It's been 3 months. He's gone off traveling and he's not very reliable. Isabel is very vocal about this. She works very hard to ensure that Morgan sees the truth in the situation, which she never does. I found it a little frustrating. Not that I mind the drama and the suspense that comes from Morgan has never been treated this way or viewed this way by a guy. So I completely understand her attachment to him and her reluctance to believe that anything that was less than honest could be going on with him. But I wanted there to be moments where she second-guessed things and she was undecided about what was going on. And the only moments we had were moments when he would let her down and essentially her anger would come to the surface. But then the next thing we know, she'd flip that switch and all is forgiven. And then Isabel would make a comment about how this is the first time that Morgan has forgiven him like this. I wanted more tension there. I wanted to see Morgan. I wanted to see her character development in that sense. And there isn't any. We get something at the very end, but we don't see her eyes being opened as she moves along. But we'll get there. There's not much of a friendship between the three girls. Morgan and Isabel are very close. Morgan is nicer to Colie than Isabel is because apparently Isabel is friendship impaired. Hence, she was maybe too blunt when she first met Colie and didn't understand that she'd said something inappropriately. Colie is getting into the swing of things. She has overheard the woman with the big-headed baby gossiping about Mira. She doesn't like it, but she also hasn't done anything about it. And so she does see how she's something of a hypocrite, but she's at the Last Chance. They're about to close when two customers come in last minute. Turns out that one of those customers is Caroline Dawes, Colie's arch nemesis. Caroline, when they meet eyes, is very mean, and then she starts talking about Colie to her friend. Isabel is there, and as I said, she's kind of ambivalent regarding Colie, but she invites Colie to go home with her, kind of gives her a little bit of a makeover, and while they're there, Colie notices all the model pictures and all these other fun and fancy free pictures of Isabel with her friends. And then there's this one picture of a dumpy looking girl. She asks who it is, only for Isabel to be like, oh, that's my cousin. Colie continues throughout this novel being like, Isabel just doesn't understand what it's like for girls like me. But Isabel does say, like, you shouldn't let this girl get away with these things. You need to stand up for yourself. We continue all through the novel. There's an incident with Morgan where Mark, her fiance, says, hey, I'm gonna come. He comes hours and hours and hours later than he's supposed to. Then he leaves super duper early. 4th of July rolls around and he surprises her. This whole time, Isabel's like, he's cheating on you. If he doesn't want to talk about this wedding, there's something wrong. He never tells you where he is. He never gives you a number that you can reach him. And Morgan is straight up in denial about everything. Isabel has made points, like indisputable points. 4th of July comes about. They have a girls' night. And they go to the beach for the fireworks. This dude approaches Morgan and Isabel, and he starts chatting Isabel up, and Isabel's like, hey, Colie, go to the car to get some more beer for us. On her way there, she bumps into this super cute guy named Josh. He's like, oh, you should hang out with us sometime, or hang out with me sometime. They get interrupted. He goes off with his friends. She continues on, only to stumble across Norman. He's an artist, so he asks her if she wants to sit for a portrait for him because he is doing this portrait series. Side note about Norman, his dad is this big shot car dealer in town. He has 2 big shot brothers who also now work at this car dealership, but he wanted to go to art school. Like, the whole sports and macho man car dealership stuff isn't up his alley. His dad refuses to pay for art school, and things get so tense that he moves out. And this is when he moves in with Mira because she learns that he's just been sleeping in his car. He does have a scholarship for art school, and he's supposed to go in the fall, but he is just creating art. I don't remember if there's a specific purpose for these portraits, but he's asking her to sit for one. She is so distracted by Josh, who's across the way, that she kind of agrees to it without realizing what she's agreeing to. She goes over to hang out with Josh, only to learn that he is Caroline Dawes' cousin. And if you don't see where things are going here, Norman has a crush on Colie. She doesn't realize it because she's always seen herself as ugly. But she's interested in Josh. Josh seems to be interested in her despite what poison Caroline is spewing. She approaches their group. She stands up to Caroline, and he asks if they can stay in touch, if they can go on a date, because he doesn't live too far away. And turns out that she's Caroline's next door neighbor. And so she's like, if you want all this information, you ask Caroline. And I just felt so bad for him because, spoiler, even though she forgets about this portrait, and this is how she learns how Norman feels about her, because the girls are like, it's obvious, and if you think you're too good for him, well then maybe you don't belong here, or maybe you're too good for all of us. And this starts to turn her head and change her perception of Norman. She does start to sit for his portrait, and she just kind of sees things that she wouldn't normally have seen because she's in this situation, this one-on-one situation, and it's really intense in the way that it's just those two, and he's staring at her and he's creating something. We do touch on things with his dad, but back to my earlier point, it seems like they are hitting it off. He's the one that she's going to choose. And I felt so bad for Josh. He seemed like a decent dude. Now she's the one who very well might be blowing him off without ever giving him a chance. Not that I don't like Norman, not that I don't think she should be in a relationship with Norman, and maybe this was Dessen's intention. It was very high schoolerish, in which she just flipped from one to the other, but it doesn't sit well with me because these aren't the lessons that she's learning. She seems to be a different sort of person than that, so the fact that we introduced a love interest only to essentially drop him in favor of somebody else without giving him an explanation. We do learn that, I guess to some capacity, Norman's dad is trying to make amends with him. At any rate, I'm kind of tuned out around this point. But while she's sitting for these portraits, his phone continues to ring. He doesn't answer. The person on the other end of the line doesn't leave a message, but obviously wants to say something. She deduces that it's his dad. They have a little bit of a chat about it. And as I said, I kind of tuned out, so I can't really tell you what that resolution is. In the midst of all of this, they come home from the 4th of July party for Mark to be hanging out on the front step. Morgan is ecstatic. She decides if he doesn't want to talk about the wedding stuff because he's so busy, I'll surprise him. I'll show up at his game. And Isabel made the best point, because even in this era of Stone Age technology, they don't really have internet, you know, they don't have cell phones, they don't have access to information the way we do now. They do have newspapers. It's like AAA. The schedule is printed in the newspaper. It's not hard to figure out where he is. So Morgan's whole excuse of like, I don't know where he is because his schedule changes, no, it doesn't fly. He's like, oh my gosh, I saw they're gonna be in Durham, so I'm gonna go surprise him. We can go over to this little town, we can get married real quick, and then, you know, bada bing, bada boom. She goes, she comes back, and she is devastated because not only was Isabel right on every single point, but Mark had another woman. This woman happened to be somebody who took their clothes off for money, and not only were they together, but they were married and she was pregnant. He had been caught by Morgan once before with one of those kind of women in his room. I don't know if it's the same one. I don't know if they got married because he got her in the family way, if you will. But I felt so bad for Isabel at this point because Morgan took out all of her anger on Isabel because Isabel was right. And Mira makes a good point that she's embarrassed because she denied all of this, and now it's all been true, and Isabel is the one who foretold it. I didn't quite care for the way that Dessen wrote Morgan's reaction. She won't talk to Isabel. She won't let Isabel into their shared home. And it's the same night where the portrait is finally finished. Colie sees that Morgan is in a much better state of mind, and now she's like, I guess, forgiven everything, and she's come to terms with it. It was like such a quick turnaround. I know it's been a couple days, but like we saw nothing about her to intimate that she was going to be in this position of forgiveness and understanding and moving on so quickly. That's kind of where things end. Colie recognizes the traits of the women in her life. Her new friends have given her an acceptance and an understanding that she never would have had before, and she's gained all the self-confidence. We do also get information, like finally, like there's all these names that she's referred to as that I was like, are we ever going to understand why? So one is Hole in One, because apparently this new kid had come to town. She and this new kid had connected. They go off and, you know, like are wandering the golf course and they're watching the stars, only for the popular kids to show up and find them. And Caroline Dawes starts to spread rumors about her. She'd also been the one who nicknamed Colie with every overweight name in the book. And so we finally get to see all these things that had scarred her. I thought they took a little, like, particularly Hole in One, I thought it took a little too long to be revealed. But it was a really good coming of age novel of self-acceptance, because she does change in small ways, like physically, but she's still her. She doesn't necessarily change who she is to fit in. She realizes who she needs to be to like herself. So that is Keeping the Moon. I'd love to know what you think and what your favorite Sarah Dessen book is. And if you want to like, subscribe, comment, I won't be against that either. But have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.